Steve Thompson stared at the document on his executive desk on the 47th floor of San Francisco, the words dancing before his eyes as if written in a foreign language. Final approval, Cedar Falls Elementary School Closure, Montana, Rural Efficiency Project, Borough 847. His signature was there, dried 3 months ago, authorizing what his company called Educational Resource Optimization. For Steve, it had been just another paper among hundreds. Until today. Until the lawyer's call about his father's inheritance. Until discovering that the school his company Techno Rural Solutions was closing was located exactly in Cedar Falls, the town where his father had lived and died, alone, 4 months ago. The cold Montana wind cut through Steve's $3,000 jacket as he stood on the empty street, holding a cell phone with no signal like it was a useless map. At 34, this CEO of a rural modernization company that generated $200 million annually had never felt so lost. The irony was bitter. He made money optimizing small towns, but had never actually lived in one. The small red brick elementary school in front of him radiated golden warmth through windows fogged by the cold. A simple sign read, Cedar Falls Elementary School, founded 1952. Steve swallowed hard, remembering the document on his desk. In 2 months, that sign would be removed forever. The scent of approaching snow mixed with the distant aroma of burning wood, creating an atmosphere that awakened memories Steve preferred to keep buried. Memories of his father trying to teach him about responsibility, about community, about values that Steve had dismissed as rural sentimentalism inadequate for the 21st century. If you've ever felt completely out of your element, far from what you consider home, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This CEO was about to discover that sometimes we destroy exactly what we most need to find. Sir, you look lost. Steve turned and saw a girl of maybe 6 years old, with brown curls escaping from a pink wool hat and eyes that sparkled with genuine curiosity. She wore a worn but clean coat, carrying a backpack that seemed almost her size. There was something about the way she looked at him, without judgment, simply offering help, that immediately disarmed all his corporate defenses. My mommy always says that when adults stand around shaking phones, they're lost, the girl continued with the direct logic of children. She works here at the school and knows everyone. Want me to take you to her? Steve pocketed his phone, forcing a smile. That would be very kind. I'm looking for the Thompson farm. Do you know it? The girl's eyes lit up. Of course. It was Mr. Thompson's who died. Mommy always said he was kind, but seemed sad. She tilted her head with childish curiosity. Are you related to him? Before Steve could answer, a female voice cut through the cold air with absolute maternal urgency. Emma, Emma, where are you? The voice stopped abruptly as a woman appeared running down the school steps, clearly worried. Steve felt something strange in his chest when he saw her. There was a calm strength in her movements, a natural dignity that contrasted with the simple work clothes she wore. Sarah Mitchell stopped a few feet away, quickly assessing the situation. Her green eyes studied Steve for a moment, the expensive haircut, the designer jacket, the posture of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms, but there was no judgment in her gaze, only the protective caution of a mother. Sorry, sir, Emma, we've talked about speaking to strangers. But Mommy, he's lost, and he knew Mr. Thompson, Emma said, taking her mother's hand with absolute confidence. Steve quickly extended his hand. Steve Thompson, John Thompson was my father, and your daughter is right. I'm completely lost here. Recognition flashed in Sarah's eyes, followed by something that seemed like understanding mixed with surprise. Sarah Mitchell. And this is Emma. She hesitated for a moment. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father he was a good person, always spoke of you with great pride. The simplicity of the statement hit Steve unexpectedly. When was the last time anyone had spoken of his father this way? Without the layers of resentment that always surrounded their shared memories. Thank you, he said, his voice lower than intended. We didn't talk much in recent years. Emma looked between them with the sharp perception that only children possess. My daddy doesn't talk to me either. Mommy says sometimes daddies are afraid to talk about feelings. Sarah blushed but smiled at her daughter. Emma has opinions about everything. Wise opinions, it seems, Steve said, surprising himself with the sincerity. You said you work here at the school? I'm a janitor and administrative assistant, Sarah replied, with a dignity that transformed the position into something noble. Emma studies here too. It's a small school, but it's the best school in the world, Emma interrupted. Mommy helps with everything. She knows more about plants and animals than any book. Steve noticed the pride glowing in Sarah's eyes, mixed with something that seemed like melancholy. There was a story there, he realized, layers of lived life hidden behind apparent simplicity. The wind blew stronger, bringing the first snowflakes. Sarah looked at the darkening sky and then at Steve. The Thompson farm is about 15 minutes from here, but the road can be tricky if you don't know it. The weather is getting worse. She hesitated, clearly debating something internally. There's a cafe on Main Street. Maybe it would be better to wait out the storm. Emma and I were going to stop there anyway. Steve was going to refuse automatically. He had schedules, legal matters to resolve, a corporate life waiting back in San Francisco, but something about the way Emma looked at him, full of hope, and the gentle but reserved way Sarah had offered help, made the words die in his throat. I would like that very much if it's no trouble. The smile that lit up Emma's face was like sun breaking through storm clouds. Yay! You'll love Mabel's Cafe. As they walked down Main Street, a single road lined with old shops with welcoming windows, Steve found himself observing the interaction between mother and daughter. The way Sarah automatically adjusted Emma's scarf, how Emma hopped from stone to stone on the path, telling stories about every house they passed. There was a lightness there, a natural connection he couldn't remember having with his own father. But beneath the observation, a growing guilt gnawed at his stomach. In 2 months, Emma would no longer have a school to attend. Sarah would no longer have a job. The community would lose its educational center. And all because Steve Thompson had signed a paper without thinking twice about the human lives behind the numbers. That's Mrs. Peterson's house. She has a cat that always sits in the window, Emma narrated, pointing to a yellow Victorian house. And there's where Mr. Murphy lives. He fixes cars and always has dirty hands. Emma knows everyone in town, Sarah said fondly. She's curious about people. Everyone has a story, right, Mummy? Emma said seriously. What's your story, Mr. Steve? The question, asked with such innocent directness, almost made Steve stumble on the uneven sidewalk. What was his story? Successful CEO who optimized rural communities for extinction? Son who fled his roots to destroy communities like the one where he grew up? Man who had chosen spreadsheets and algorithms instead of real people? I work with computers and business, he finally said, feeling how hollow the answer sounded. What kind of business? Emma asked with the relentless curiosity of children. Steve hesitated. How to explain to a 6-year-old that he made money closing schools like hers? I help companies run better. That sounds important, but you look sad when you talk about it. Sarah quickly intervened. Emma, some questions are too personal. No, it's okay, Steve said, surprised again by the child's perception. She's right. I guess I don't like my job as much as I thought I did. They reached the cafe, a small establishment with fogged windows and an old bell that rang when they opened the door. The warmth enveloped them immediately, laden with aromas of coffee, cinnamon, and something that smelled like homemade bread. It was exactly the type of place Steve would normally consider inefficient and outdated, and also the type of place he had never really experienced. Sarah, dear, and my little Emma, a robust woman with graying hair and a warm smile came to greet them. And who is this distinguished young man? Mabel, this is Steve Thompson, John's son. Mabel's face immediately softened with maternal sadness. Oh dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Always stopped here on Thursdays to have coffee and read the local paper. She studied him with eyes that seemed to see through surfaces. You have his eyes, and the same stubbornness in the chin. Steve felt a tightness in his chest. His father came here every week, had a routine, relationships, an entire life that Steve had never bothered to know. They settled at a table near the window. Emma immediately began drawing on a napkin, while Sarah and Steve talked in low voices. Hot chocolate arrived in enormous mugs, the kind of thing Steve normally avoided for not being nutritionally optimized, and he couldn't remember when he had tasted something so comforting. So, Sarah said softly, stirring her mug, you came to settle inheritance matters? Steve nodded. the guilt returning like a wave. My lawyer said there are some complications. Apparently, I'll need to stay here for at least a month. He paused, looking out the window at the school. Honestly, I just wanted to resolve everything quickly and go back home. Where is home? Emma asked, looking up from her drawing. San Francisco, it's a big city in California. Does it have schools there? Many, Steve said, then quickly corrected himself. Big schools with lots of students? Emma frowned. But here everyone knows each other. How can you know your friends if there are too many people? How can you know your friends if there are too many people? The simple question echoed in Steve's mind. When was the last time he had really known anyone? Not professional networking or strategic relationships, but true human connection. It's different in the city, he said weakly. Sounds lonely, Emma observed, returning to her drawing. Lonely. The word hit Steve like a precise medical diagnosis. When was the last time he hadn't felt fundamentally alone, even surrounded by people? Sarah was watching him with those green eyes that seemed to see beyond polished surfaces. Your father talked about you, you know. Whenever he came here, always said you had built something impressive, that you were smarter than he ever was. Steve almost choked on his hot chocolate. He said that? Every Thursday, Mabel had approached again, wiping the neighboring table but clearly listening. Always ended by saying he wished you two could talk more, but that he understood you were busy building your important life. The words hit Steve like a physical punch to the stomach. Your important life. All the anger he had, carried for years, for his father never understanding his ambitions, for never supporting his move to the city, for being too provincial to comprehend the modern world, suddenly seemed not only unfounded, but cruelly unfair. I didn't know, he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. Emma had stopped drawing and was looking at him with a serious expression. Do you miss your daddy? The simple question, asked with the brutal honesty that only children possess, broke something inside Steve. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. I miss him very much. I miss my daddy sometimes too, even though he left when I was a baby, Emma said, pushing her drawing across the table. I drew this for you. It's your daddy's farm. Mommy and I walk by it when we take walks. It's pretty. Steve took the drawing with slightly trembling hands. It was a childish representation of a farm, a simple house, a barn, some stick figures, and what appeared to be grazing animals. In the corner, in a child's crooked letters, Emma had written, For Mr. Steve, your real home. Your real home, not the property or the inheritance. Your real home. Thank you, Emma. It's beautiful, Steve managed to say, fighting against the emotion that threatened to overflow. The silence that followed was comfortable, not awkward. Steve looked out the window at Main Street, watching the few local residents walking between shops, greeting each other by name. There was something about the rhythm of life here, the way people moved with purpose but without frantic haste. That contrasted dramatically with San Francisco's energy. But beneath the observation, the weight of his responsibility in this community's fate grew like a stone in his stomach. How could he look at Sarah and Emma, at Mabel and everyone else, knowing he had signed the death sentence of their way of life? May I ask, he finally said, struggling to keep his voice casual, how are things at the school? Sarah paused, a shadow crossing her face. Well, actually, we received some difficult news last week. The district, they decided to close the school at the end of the school year. Steve felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Close? Some rural efficiency company did a study, Sarah continued, her voice remaining steady despite obvious pain. They said it's not economically viable to maintain a school with only 42 students. They want to send the children to the school in the big city, 50 kilometers from here. But that means 2 hours of bus travel daily for 5-year-olds, Emma added, with the seriousness of someone who had heard this conversation many times. And many families can't, what's the word, Mummy? Can't handle the logistics, Sarah completed. Many children will simply stop attending school regularly. Steve opened and closed his mouth, words refusing to come out. He was looking directly at the lives his signature had destroyed. The abstract reality of educational resource optimization suddenly had faces, names, real consequences. And what will happen to you? He managed to ask. Sarah gave a sad but resilient smile. Well, if there's no school, there's no need for a janitor. I'll look for work in the big city. Emma and I will have to move. The idea of Sarah and Emma being forced to leave their community, their life, because of a decision he had made without thinking twice, made Steve feel physically sick. But Mommy always finds a way, Emma said with unshakable confidence. She's the smartest person I know. The love and faith in Emma's eyes when she looked at her mother was something so pure it caused physical pain in Steve's chest. This child was about to lose her school, her community, her stability, and yet she maintained absolute faith that her mother would make everything work out. Because of me, Steve thought, guilt transforming into something close to despair. All of this is because of me. Steve, Sarah said, softly. Are you okay? You've gone very pale. Excuse me, it's a lot of information. Steve stood abruptly. I need to go to the bathroom. In the cafe's small bathroom, Steve leaned against the sink, looking at his reflection in the stained mirror. The man looking back seemed like a stranger, pale, shaken, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. What have I done? The question echoed in his mind. What the hell have I done? He pulled out his phone, checking if he had gotten any signal. A weak bar appeared and he quickly dialed his assistant's number. Jennifer, it's me. I need you to send me all the Cedar Falls project documents immediately. Now, Mr. Thompson, it's almost 9 p.m. in San Francisco. Now, Steve said, his voice harder than intended. And Jennifer, I want you to research everything about the impact of our rural school closures in the last 2 years. Follow-up reports, dropout statistics, impact on communities, everything. Sir, that kind of post-implementation analysis normally isn't. Jennifer, Steve cut in, looking again at his reflection. For the first time in my career, I need to know if we're actually helping people or just destroying their lives to increase numbers on spreadsheets. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Understood, sir. I'll have everything ready tomorrow morning. Steve returned to the table, where Emma was showing Sarah her latest drawing. Him, Sarah, and Emma, holding hands in front of the school. Look, Mr. Steve, I drew the 3 of us. Steve looked at the drawing, 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun, all smiling. It was impossible not to notice that Emma had drawn him and Sarah the same height, with Emma in the middle like a family. It's beautiful, Emma, he said, his voice hoarse. Can I ask a question? Emma said, tilting her head. Why do you look sad now? You were smiling before. Why do you look sad now? How to explain to a 6-year-old that you discovered you're the monster in her story? Sometimes adults get sad when they discover they did wrong things without realizing it, Steve said honestly. Emma nodded, with the seriousness of a counselor. Mommy says when we do wrong things we can try to fix them. That's why she always lets me try again when I mess something up. We can try to fix them. Emma's words echoed as they finished their drinks. Would it be possible? Was there a way to undo the damage he had caused? When they left the cafe, snow was falling more heavily. Sarah insisted on guiding Steve to his father's farm, with Emma hopping between them, asking questions about everything she saw. The Thompson farm was on a winding rural road, surrounded by fields that stretched to distant mountains. When they stopped in front of the weathered wooden gate, Steve felt a wave of complex and contradictory emotions. The house was exactly as he remembered from childhood, a 2-story construction with a wide porch, painted white but now peeling in some places. The red barn was still standing, though it needed repairs. Fields that were once cultivated were now covered with snow, but Steve could imagine how green they looked in summer. I haven't been inside here since the funeral, Sarah said softly as they walked toward the house. Your father kept everything very well maintained. Always said he was keeping the place ready for when you came back. Ready for when you came back. The words were like a knife in Steve's heart. His father had maintained hope until the end that his rebellious son would one day return home. Emma ran ahead, fascinated by everything. Wow, so many places to explore. Mr. Steve, did you play here when you were a child? Yes, Steve said, his voice hoarser than expected. I helped my father with the animals, planted seeds in spring. Why did you stop? Why did you stop? Emma's simple question echoed as they approached the house. Steve had the prepared answers. University, career opportunities, city life. But standing there, looking at the place where he had grown up, with a child whose life he had inadvertently destroyed, those reasons seemed not only incomplete, but deeply selfish. I thought there were more important things to do, he finally said. More important than this? Emma asked, gesturing to the majestic mountains, the wide fields, the peace of the place. Steve had no answer. How to explain that he had traded all this for an office on the 47th floor, where he made decisions affecting communities he had never visited? Sarah had found the key hidden in the place Steve remembered, under the third porch step, and they entered the silent house. The smell was devastatingly familiar: old wood, coffee, and something indefinable that was simply father. The furniture was covered with sheets, but Steve could see that nothing had changed much since his last visit, years ago. "He kept your room exactly as you left it," Sarah said, pointing to the stairs, "as if you were going to come back any moment." Steve climbed hesitantly, Sarah and Emma following behind. His teenage bedroom was like a personal museum: science trophies on the shelf, technology posters on the walls, programming books next to agriculture manuals. It was as if his father was eternally waiting for him to come home, but it was the desk that made Steve stop completely. Stacks of letters addressed to him, never sent. With trembling hands, he picked up the first one. "My dear Steve." It began with his father's familiar handwriting. "I saw a news story about your company in the Wall Street Journal today. I wanted to call to congratulate you, but I'm not sure if you'd want to hear from me. I know you didn't approve of my simple life, and maybe you're right. Maybe the world really needs people like you who understand business and efficiency." Steve opened another letter, and another. Years of unsent correspondence, each expressing pride mixed with insecurity, love tinged with doubt about his own worth. Letters apologizing for not understanding Steve's choices, for not being able to support him better in the modern world. Letters sharing simple news from the farm, the town, the life Steve had left behind. And then he found a letter dated just 3 weeks before his father's death. "Steve, I'm getting old, and maybe it's too late to fix our mistakes, but I want you to know that every day I'm proud of the intelligent and successful man you've become. I read about your company helping rural communities modernize. It's ironic, my son finally found a way to improve places like where he grew up. I just wish we could have found a way to share our worlds instead of you having to choose just one. Maybe someday you'll understand that I never wanted you to be like me. I wanted you to be better, and you succeeded." "Why is Mr. Steve crying?" Emma asked, her voice small and worried. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, also with tears in her eyes. "Sometimes we cry when we realize we lost precious time. Sometimes we cry when we discover we were loved more than we imagined." Steve wiped his eyes, looking at Emma through a haze of emotion. "My father. He loved me very much, and I loved him too, but we were too proud to tell each other that." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy always says we should talk about love while we still can." The child's simple wisdom hit Steve like lightning. How many opportunities had he lost? How many words went unsaid? And how many people, like Sarah and Emma, was he hurting right now because of decisions made in distant offices? They spent the next hour exploring the farm. Steve showed Emma the barn where he used to play, the field where he learned to drive the tractor, the places where he had been truly happy before deciding that happiness was unproductive and unquantifiable. "You could make this a farm again," Emma said as they stood in the barn, watching the sunset through dusty windows. "It would be a lot of work," Steve said, "and I don't know if I still remember how." "You could learn again," Sarah said softly. "People learn new things all the time. Like Mommy learning to be a mom," Emma added. Exactly like that. Steve looked around the barn, imagining it full of life again. Not necessarily in the traditional way his father had known, but something new. Something that combined his technology experience with the rural values he had rejected. Something that could actually help communities instead of optimizing them for extinction. "You're thinking about something," Sarah observed. "Maybe," Steve admitted. "Just an idea. Probably crazy." "The best ideas start out crazy," Emma said with the seriousness of a business consultant. On the way back to town, while Emma dozed in the back seat of Steve's rental car, Sarah finally asked the question he had been dreading. "Steve, may I ask, what exactly does your company do? You said you help companies run better, but..." Steve gripped the steering wheel tighter, the knot in his stomach tightening. "We evaluate rural systems, schools, health clinics, public services. We look for ways to make them more efficient." Efficient how? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Steve knew he couldn't lie to her. not after the day they had shared, but he also knew the truth would destroy everything. Sometimes, he said carefully, that means consolidating services, closing smaller facilities in favor of larger centers that serve more people. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Like small schools, Steve confirmed, his voice almost inaudible. And your company, does it work with the state of Montana? Steve closed his eyes for a second before answering. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Steve could feel Sarah processing the information, connecting the dots. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled but cold. Steve, was your company responsible for the decision about our school? Steve stopped the car on the side of the road, unable to continue driving while his life crumbled around him. Sarah, I can explain. You? Her voice rose an octave. You personally were involved in the decision to close my daughter's school? In the back seat, Emma woke up to the raised voices. Mommy, what's happening? Steve turned to face Sarah, seeing betrayal and anger growing in her eyes. I signed the document, yes. But Sarah, you have to understand. I didn't know. I had never visited the communities, never thought about the real people affected. It was just numbers on paper. Numbers on paper? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the laugh. My daughter is a number on paper. Her future, her education, our entire life. Just numbers? No, that's not... Mommy, why are you fighting? Emma interrupted, her voice small and scared. Sarah took a deep breath, clearly struggling to control herself in front of her daughter. Emma, honey, let's get out of the car. We can walk home from here. Sarah, please, let me explain. Explain what? She opened the door, helping Emma out. That you came here pretending to be just a grieving son visiting his father's inheritance. That you let me tell you about our problems, about how the school is closing, knowing all along that you were responsible. I wasn't pretending. Nothing about today was pretense. Sarah stopped, turned to him with eyes blazing with tears of anger. Then what was it, Steve? Guilt? Did you want to see firsthand the damage you caused? I wanted to know my father. I wanted to understand why he never forgave me for leaving this place. He did forgive you, Sarah shouted. You read the letters. He loved you, admired you, forgave you long ago. The only person who never forgave you was yourself. The truth of Sarah's words hit Steve like a physical blow. Emma started crying, scared by the argument between the two adults she had begun to love. Mommy, stop! Please stop yelling! Sarah immediately knelt, pulling Emma into a hug. I'm sorry, honey, I'm sorry. Mommy shouldn't have yelled. Steve got out of the car, approaching hesitantly. Emma, No, Sarah said firmly, standing up with Emma in her arms. You've done enough. Sarah, please let me fix this. Fix it? Sarah laughed bitterly. How? The school closes in 2 months. I lose my job. Emma loses her friends, her stability. How exactly do you plan to fix this? I can reverse the decision. I can force the district to keep the school open. With what authority? You said they already signed the papers. Steve ran his hands through his hair, desperate. I'm the CEO of the company. I can find a way. And why would you do that? Sarah asked, her voice icy. Guilt? Or do you actually care what happens to us? The question hung in the cold night air. Steve looked at Emma, who stared at him with big, confused eyes, then at Sarah, who looked at him as if he were a dangerous stranger. I care, he said, his voice breaking. More than I've cared about anything in years. Sarah, I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. But please, give me a chance to try to make it right. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Emma and I are going to walk home. You can go wherever you want, to the farm, to a hotel, back to San Francisco. I don't care, but I don't want to see you tomorrow. Mommy, Emma said timidly. Mr. Steve wasn't trying to be mean. He seemed happy today. Sometimes people seem happy when they're actually lying, honey. I wasn't lying about being happy, Steve said desperately. Today was the first day in years I felt truly alive. Sarah didn't respond. She simply took Emma's hand and began walking toward town, leaving Steve standing alone on the snowy roadside. Steve spent the night at his father's farm without electricity, using only the heat from a fireplace he managed to light with old wood. He read all of his father's letters one by one until his tears dried and a cold determination took hold. At 6 in the morning, he called his assistant. Jennifer, cancel all my meetings for the next 2 months. Sir, we have the investor presentation on Thursday. Cancel it. And I want you to schedule an emergency meeting with the board of directors for today at 2 p.m. San Francisco time. An emergency meeting? About what? Steve looked out his father's kitchen window, seeing the red brick school in the distance. About fundamental changes in the company's direction. And Jennifer, I want you to prepare a report on what happened to the children from all the rural schools we've closed in the last 5 years. Where they study now, how many stopped attending regularly, impact on families. Sir, that kind of follow-up analysis has never been a priority, Steve completed. That's the problem. Make it happen. 2 hours later, Steve was at Mabel's cafe, laptop open, preparing the most important presentation of his career. Mabel brought him coffee without him asking, but said nothing about his appearance, wrinkled clothes from sleeping at the farm without electricity, red eyes from a sleepless night. Rough night? She asked gently. Rough life, Steve replied. But maybe I can fix at least part of it. At 9 in the morning, Emma appeared at the cafe window, pressing her nose against the glass. When she saw Steve, she waved timidly. Sarah appeared a moment later, took Emma's hand and quickly moved out of sight. At 2 p.m. San Francisco time, Steve was in a video conference with 8 of the most powerful men in the rural business world. His laptop was positioned so that Cedar Falls School was visible in the background. Gentlemen, Steve began, his voice firmer than it had been in months, I called this meeting to discuss a fundamental change in techno-rural solutions direction. Steve, interrupted Richard Morrison, chairman of the board, I hope this isn't about sentimentalism. Our profits are at historic highs. That's exactly what I want to talk about, Richard. Our profits and what they really cost. Steve clicked to the first slide of his presentation, a photo of Emma at her school desk. This is Emma Mitchell, 6 years old. In 2 months, she'll lose her school because of a decision I made, a decision based purely on numbers, without considering the real human cost. Steve, Richard said with a warning tone, where are you going with this? I'm getting to the fact that our company is systematically destroying rural communities in the name of efficiency, and it's time we stopped. The silence on the call was deafening. Steve continued, in the last 5 years, we've closed 47 rural schools. Do you know how many children that affected? 1,247. Do you know how many stopped attending school regularly? 312. Do you know how many families were forced to move? 89. Those are numbers of progress, Steve, said another board member. Efficient resource consolidation. Those are numbers of destroyed lives, Steve retorted, and I'm proposing that we completely change our business model. He clicked to the next slide. Instead of closing rural schools, we're going to save them. We're going to use technology to connect them with urban resources. We're going to create a model of rural education that is sustainable and excellent. With what money? Richard asked coldly. With my money, Steve said. I'm proposing that I buy the majority stake in the company and change our mission completely. Steve, Richard laughed, are you having a nervous breakdown? This is business suicide. No, Richard. This is business evolution. And if you don't want to be part of it, I'll buy your stakes. The meeting lasted 3 hours. In the end, Steve had committed 80% of his personal fortune to buy the company and transform it from a rural efficiency optimizer to a rural community revitalizer. When the last board member hung up the call after accepting a generous buyout offer for his shares, Steve closed the laptop and allowed himself a moment of absolute terror about what he had just done. But then Emma appeared again at the cafe window. This time, when she saw him, she smiled and waved. Steve waved back. The next morning, Steve knocked on Sarah's door at 7 a.m., carrying a thick folder of documents and a determined expression. Sarah opened the door, still in her robe, clearly not expecting visitors. Steve, I bought my company, he interrupted. I spent almost everything I had, and the first decision I made as sole owner was to reverse the closure of Cedar Falls School. Sarah stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm talking about official documents declaring that Cedar Falls Elementary School will receive full funding for the next 10 years, plus funds for technological improvements, plus resources for hiring additional teachers. He extended the folder. I'm talking about transforming this school into the model for future rural education. You did this? I did, and there's more. Steve took a deep breath. Sarah, I read your college transcript. You were on the dean's list in education before you stopped. I want you to finish your degree with a full scholarship while directing the Rural Educational Innovation Pilot Program here. Sarah took the folder with trembling hands, flipping through the official documents. Steve, is this real? It's real. But Sarah, I'm not doing this to try to buy your forgiveness. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and because, he hesitated, because you two showed me that real success isn't about how many zeros you have in your bank account. It's about how many lives you make better. Emma appeared behind Sarah, still in pajamas. Mr. Steve, you came back. Hi, Emma. Yes, I came back. Mommy was sad yesterday. She cried when she thought I wasn't looking. Emma, Sarah said gently, adults sometimes cry when they're confused about feelings. And now, Emma asked, are you still confused? Sarah looked at Steve, then at the documents in her hands, then back at Steve. I'm starting to understand some things. Like what? Emma pressed. Like sometimes people do wrong things because they don't know how to do right things. And sometimes, when they learn, they try very, very hard to fix things. Steve felt tears stinging his eyes. Sarah, I know I broke your trust. I know it might take a long time for you to trust me again, but I would really like a chance to prove I'm better than the worst things I've done. Mr. Steve, Emma said seriously, are you going to stay here now? Forever? Steve looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. That depends on your mommy, but yes, Emma, I'm staying. This is my home now. 6 months later, Cedar Falls Community School had become a national model. Children from remote farms attended advanced classes through virtual reality. Urban teachers offered mentoring through video conferencing. Sarah's outdoor science program had been featured in National Geographic magazine. Steve had sold his San Francisco apartment and moved permanently to his father's renovated farm. He woke up every day not to maximize profits, but to maximize human potential. More importantly, he had learned the difference between being successful and being significant. On a spring afternoon, Steve was in the school's experimental garden with Emma, now 7 years old and more curious than ever, helping her plant seedlings for her project on sustainable agriculture. Mr. Steve, Emma said, can I ask a question? Always, Emma. Do you love my mommy? Steve almost dropped the watering can. After 6 months living in Cedar Falls, working side by side with Sarah, having dinner at their house 3 times a week, he thought his feelings were obvious to everyone. Yes, Emma, I love your mommy very much. And do you love me too? Like you were my own daughter. Emma nodded solemnly. So when are you going to ask her to marry you? The direct question made Steve laugh, the same genuine laugh he had discovered that first afternoon at Mabel's cafe. Is it that obvious? To me it is. Mommy turns red when you smile at her, and you always bring flowers when you come for dinner, and you built an entire library at the school just because she mentioned wanting more books. You're very observant. Mommy taught me to pay attention to important things. Emma paused in her planting. Are you scared? A little, Steve admitted. What if she says no? Emma looked at him as if he had said the most ridiculous thing in the world. Mr. Steve, Mommy loves you too. It's obvious to everyone except you two. That night, after dinner at the house they had begun to share informally, Steve finally found courage. Sarah was on the porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the garden when he joined her. Sarah, he said, his voice more nervous than in any negotiation he had ever conducted. Remember when you asked me why I would do all that for the school, if it was guilt or if I really cared? Sarah turned to look at him. I remember. Well, I found the answer. Steve knelt right there on the porch, taking a small box from his pocket. The box contained a simple but elegant ring, not the kind of diamond rock he would have bought 6 months ago, but something that reflected who he had become. Sarah Mitchell, you taught me that home isn't a place where you're born. It's a place where you choose to plant roots and care for the people you love. You showed me that real success is measured in smiles over the breakfast table, in 7-year-old science projects, in communities that thrive because we care for each other. Sarah was very quiet, tears shining in her eyes. Will you marry me? Not because I fixed my mistakes, but because I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you and Emma helped me become? For a moment that seemed eternal. Sarah just looked at him. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across her face. "Steve Thompson," she said, "you asked me a question a long time ago about going back to school, and you said it was never too late for dreams. Well, my biggest dream was always to find someone who would love me and Emma, not despite our circumstances, but because of who we are. And yes, I want to marry you." Emma's cry of joy from the garden indicated she had been watching from the window. I knew it! Now we're a real family!" Steve kissed Sarah under Montana's starry sky, with fireflies dancing around them, and Emma, his daughter now, as much as she was Sarah's, applauding enthusiastically. A year later, at a wedding held in the garden of the school they had saved, with the entire town of Cedar Falls present, Steve Thompson married Sarah Mitchell in a ceremony that was as much a celebration of love as it was a symbol of the transformation. That happens when we choose community over profit, people over numbers. Emma was the maid of honor, obviously, carrying the rings on a pillow she had embroidered herself with Thompson Mitchell family in letters that were now steadier, but still full of childish love. During his speech, Steve looked at the audience, neighbors who had become family, a community that had prospered through innovation based on human values, and spoke about how sometimes you need to get completely lost to find your true purpose. 2 years ago, he said, I was a man who measured success in dollars and mergers, who made decisions about human lives based only on spreadsheets, who had chosen an empty empire over a full life. He looked at Sarah, radiant in her simple but elegant dress, and at Emma, who was discreetly trying to teach tricks to the family dog they had adopted. They taught me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate for yourself, it's what you build for others. And what we've built here, together, is worth more than any fortune I could have kept. 2 years later, Steve woke up in the renovated farmhouse to the familiar sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Sarah was making pancakes while Emma, now 9 years old and president of the school's science club, enthusiastically explained her latest project to their younger brother Jake, who was 2 years old and listened with the seriousness of someone who understood every word. Cedar Falls Community School had become a national reference, with educators coming from around the world to study its model. Sarah now directed a teacher training program being implemented in 50 states. Steve had written a best-selling book about business with purpose, but his favorite work was still helping with Emma's homework and teaching Jake about how things grow. "Dad, Steve," Emma said as he entered the kitchen, "can I use the farm greenhouse for my project on solar energy applied to agriculture?" "Sure, but only if you teach Jake about photosynthesis first." "Deal," Emma shouted, picking up Jake and spinning with him until he laughed out loud. Sarah approached Steve, kissing him softly. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife. How did you sleep?" "Perfectly. I dreamed about our 10th wedding anniversary." "Only 8 years to go," Steve laughed. "You never stop planning, do you?" "That's where you fell in love with me." "No," Steve said, pulling her closer while watching their children play. "I fell in love with you because you showed me that family isn't about blood or perfect planning. It's about choosing every day to care for each other. It's about building something bigger than yourself." Outside, the farm stretched under Montana's vast sky, prosperous with sustainable innovation and technology that served real people. The school was full of curious children from throughout the region. The town of Cedar Falls had tripled in size but maintained its soul. But inside the warm kitchen, with children's laughter and the smell of fresh coffee, Steve knew he had found the greatest wealth of all. A life built on love, purpose, and the courage to admit when you're wrong, and the determination to make everything right. "Daddy," Jake said, tugging at Steve's pants, "will you teach me about the cows today?" Steve picked up his son, looking at Sarah preparing breakfast, at Emma writing furiously in her experiment notebook, at the life they had built together through courageous choices and unconditional. "So I come to shore, son," he said. "I'll teach you about everything." Did this story touch you? Steve discovered that true success isn't about destroying for profit, but about building to last. He learned that family isn't who shares your blood, but who shares your dreams. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between what was profitable and what was right? Have you ever discovered you were on the wrong path and had the courage to completely change direction? Your story could inspire someone facing the same choice today. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more narratives about second chances, true love, and the courage to start over when we discover our true purpose. And don't forget to like. Each like reminds us that stories about kindness and redemption still matter in this world. Where are you watching from? Leave your city in the comments and tell us, what was the moment that completely changed the course of your life? We love knowing that our community extends throughout the United States and beyond, united by the belief that it's never too late to choose love over profit, family over fame, and purpose over power.